Hi, it's Mike Sanborn. I'd like to discuss proactive police practices um, and things I presented in my book, A Cop in a Small City, Evaluating Mission and Integrity. As you know, there's been a lot of negative press. Cameras are everywhere. Police don't look well. So this is the hope that gets you to look at yourselves and be proactive to prevent this negative press coming. So, purpose is to support all law enforcement agencies in the continued development of ethical and moral cultures, encourage citizen involvement, and generally encourage respectful interactions between and among everybody. So my credentials are, I grew up with access to conservative grandparents, high school science and math, those were my strengths, as they were in college. I have a bachelor's degree from St. Mike's and 2 master's degrees in the other schools. Commissioned military service. I was a police officer for many years, corrections officer, government administration, science teacher for decades, and a published author. So my objectives are to improve public perception of the police, improve morale within the police. As we know, pride comes with high technical and ethical standards. I want you to consider organizational development, how your organization and its mission adapts to changing complexes in society. So also to identify, avoid, and address police misconduct. I like to see supervision as supervision based on improvement, discipline for development. Discipline comes from the Latin term disciplina, which means to teach. So supervision and discipline should be to teach or to correct behavior rather than to punish it. So increase positivity and mindfulness within the ranks, which will reduce turnover, and I encourage broader education at all levels. So reactive practices, which is what we see when we watch the news, police debrief after it to try to improve operations and avoid similar incident. But let's see how we can possibly get to it so that it doesn't happen to begin with. So public's perceptions and distrust and outcry come from these incidents. You know, the incident escalates when more cops arrive. For some reason, they seem to try to outdo each other, and the tensions rise higher. So internal investigations, supposedly conducted with professionalism. I discuss professionalism along, but it's from my perspective, is that the professionalism is, you can say it's there, but the public distrusts it. And honestly, there's distrust within the own ranks of an internal investigation, and that term professionalism I consider just a blanket cover. So it's best done by other outside agencies, but then again, that only improves the situation a little bit. There's still a lot of distrust. There's lots of concept that cops cover for cops, regardless whether you're in the same department or not. So you gotta be aware of those and try to somehow mitigate them. So when an officer gets reassigned, fired, arrested, prosecuted, or even jailed, that is absolutely horrible to the organization. So how do we get to that point to begin with? So lenders and memorandum and directives, those are absolutely useless. You know, I've seen so much discipline done by, well, there was a directive 2 months ago. Yeah, well, they're random and they're uncategorized, and they really should never hold. And actually, when they're challenged, they usually don't hold legal foothold. So policy changes are too relatively ineffective, and I'll talk more about that. So after all this reactive stuff, everything starts to return back to normal. So indicators of poor morale. So the number of discipline reports, just count them up. If you're doing a lot of discipline reports, your morale is not very good at all. So if you rely on discipline records, it's very counterproductive for morale. So they also discourage work ethic. If I'm getting in trouble, why should I work so hard? The more I do, the more I get in trouble. So purge those reports, get rid of the trivial stuff, and concentrate only when they're really necessary. So look at the level of enthusiasm among the officers. You know, how much sick leave, are they maxing out their sick leave? Do they report to work late? That kind of stuff. And then even if they're on time, How quickly do they get out onto their beat? How many breaks do they take? Do they go hide somewhere? Do they return early? So listen to the individuals. You know, that's not my job. I don't get paid enough to do that. Who really cares? Those are indicators of poor morale. And then there's selective transparency. You know, tell your supervisor only what you absolutely have to. So proactive, though, it prevents unfavorable incidences. You see open internal communications apart from the chain of command. The proactiveness welcomes public input. Proactive, you continually evaluate policies and practices. You formally assess them on a regular basis, but by whom? That's a whole other issue. Are they being followed? Are they effective? Are there too many policies? Solicit feedback. You know, if you got 400 pages of policies, they can't be followed. Nobody can memorize 400 pages. And you know, the quarter second you got to respond to something in the field. And I've worked for a department that had policies that they did not expect you to follow. So which ones do you follow? Which ones don't you follow? So frequently assess the organizational goals and operations. Now, organizational goals, that's more than a mission statement. Though you should have a mission statement. What's the long-range goals for the organization? So you should identify areas for improvement, but you also should identify your areas of strengths, because these are what you're going to build upon for improvement. So frequently assess individual performance, but do so informally. There should be no surprises when it comes to a formal assessment of an individual's work performance. So training versus education. You know, we talk about training a lot, and indeed that's what most of police work is. So training is technical skills to do the job. So how do you do something? For instance, specialized police equipment or specialized police practices and tactics. But keep in mind that this distinguishes police from the rest of the community. I naturally support a lot of education beyond the training. So education seeks to understand concepts. How do things work? Explains why we do things. So it increases understanding of culture, history, science, relationships, etc. And most particularly, the police need to understand addiction, treatment, and recovery, as well as mental health. So there's an understanding that you gain from education over and above the technical skills to do the job. And by doing so, you become part of the community, not a separate entity from the community. So an individual, though, you accept responsibility for what you do. So seek to improve your skills. You know, one of my pet peeves is if you're physically out of shape to do the job, you can't do the job. So you got to keep up on your technical skills. Knowledge, keep informed of the police policy, procedure, and organizational goals. Communicate these to the public. So maintain superior ethics beyond the code of conduct. The code of conduct stipulates minimum criteria. And hopefully your organization has at least a mission statement and a code of conduct that are distinctly separate. Consult frequently with a mentor outside the chain of command. That's pretty complicated, who those mentors are, but I think they're absolutely essential. But recognize when you're getting burned out. Take care of yourself. Find things that keep you on task. So report organizational inconsistencies. And report misconduct and follow it up. Here again, if you report it to your supervisor and nothing happens, consult with a good mentor and figure out where you go from there. But don't let it slide. So evaluate credibility. So objectivity versus subjectivity. Objective is the facts and describe them accurately. Subjectively is your opinion. Keeping those separate sometimes can be challenging. So here again, experience versus education. So practice and application. The education, especially by math and science education, really helps separate the facts. So again, training versus education. Your training will probably included report writing in a third person. That makes little sense to the average reader. So actions often contradict your words. Reports. So make those facts clear, call out your suspicions. Nothing wrong with writing about suspicions, but make sure that it's well identified and explained that it's a suspicion and why. So, and your testimony, your whole credibility in court is your testimony. You destroy that, you're done. So New Hampshire has the Laurie's list we hear about. So why is it even necessary? This is a list of officers whose credibility has been questioned. I just don't understand why you can be useful as a police officer if you don't have the credibility. So again, I propose, don't get to this point to begin with. First off, supervisors and individuals, don't destroy your credibility. But there should be some remedial action if there's some questionable stuff there. And I also would encourage, if somebody is on a remedial list and they're not fired, then there should be some sort of plan to get them back into full service. What sort of remedial action can you do with the Laurie list? So, supervision, there's got to be, you got to observe the officer directly to be a good supervisor. So also review the reports, for objectivity. Make sure they're in sufficient detail. To avoid that police jargon, because these are going to be, and you know they're going to be read by people who are not police. So write them with that understanding. So write it so somebody who wasn't there can understand what happened. Compare reports to other evidence like the body cameras we have these days. You don't have to review, supervisor, you don't have to review them all, but now and then take a look. So, and then go over it with the officer. Always, if you've got some sort of, and you should be picking up something here, to get back to the officer in order to coach them on writing a better report. So monitor the officer's physical and emotional condition too, and don't forget about your own. So suggest some ways of alleviating stress and avoid the alcohol. So also avoid complacency. You know, yeah, I suspect there's something wrong here, but I'm just going to let it slide this time. If you'd have picked up on it, then maybe we wouldn't be on national news the next day. So think critically about other perspectives. You know, think about your own leadership, people who oversee the police department, the governing body, the public, and of course the victims too. Don't forget about that. So organizational evaluations. So the chain of command does the formal communications. Formal and informal mentorships. The chain of command would be the formal mentorship. An informal mentor would be outside that chain of command. Lots of possibility there. Retired police officer, social worker within the department, things like that. There should be somebody who understands police work, but is not your boss. So open door policies. You know, I've heard that so many places. You know, my door is always open, come on anytime. That doesn't work. Plain and simple. Let me repeat that. Open door does not work. You got to get out of your office, out of your comfort zone, go into whoever you supervise's comfort zone, where they feel comfortable. That's open communications. The door is a door. You close it. It's not open communications. So frequent, thorough, and critical evaluation of the policy and procedures. The organization should have a plan to do that. Formal and informal recognition of individuals. Oh, I remember many times when I had a really tough case, a hot pursuit that went on for miles, and was really concerned. And when I finally got the person in custody and radioed back that I was returning with one, when my supervisor said, "Good job," that meant a lot to me. So seek public involvement. Perceptions improve with transparency. It will help you reduce the occurrences of unsubstantiated accusations of corruption. Keeps us honest when people watch us, right? So a mutual understanding too of police methods and procedures, and when you've got open transparency with the public. So also your recruiting practices communicate a lot about your department. Now this is standard. I bet everybody does this. An application, an exam, references, work history, education, which you spell on minimum education, right? I've worked with people with a master's degree. I have a master's degree, and I've worked subordinate to a GED. That's not good. So your interview, and ethics with police standards. You get the old standard. If Your partner takes a piece of bubble gum. Yeah, that's too easy. So communicate. Your interview communicates your organizational standards. If that's all you're worried about is your partner taking a piece of bubble gum off the rack and not paying for it, that really defines the expectations of the persons you're recruiting. And the polygraph, read my book. You'll find out how much I think about polygraphs. They are ridiculous. They're hocus pocus. Use tea leaves instead. They're more accurate. All you're measuring is that question causes stress. So, what of these practices discourage applicants? How many good applicants have these practices eliminated? So, naturally, you got to do the interview. I think that's a big thing. So, people cannot be reduced to numerical value. If you're scoring questions, you're wrong. Humans are not numbers. So have a clear concept of your organizational objectives before you start your interview. The interviewer, come out of your box. Don't drag the interviewee into your box, into your comfort zone. Listen to that person's comfort zone. So what type of candidate will meet your organizational goals? You should have a pretty good concept of that before you start your interview. Structure your questions for diverse answers. So you try to seek out what's the person's respect for different cultures. Is the person empathetic? Does that value human life? Does that value non-human life? Try to solicit those things out in your interview. So as you're getting ready for your interview, you got to select the interviewers. What's their relationship within the organization or to the organization? Quite often you ask for other departments too, but you're pretty well slanted to just police. So what are your credentials for the interviewer? And one of my pet peeves is if the first thing you say is your experience, is that you got 30 years on a job, or 20 years, whatever it is. If the years on a job is your primary credential, that tells me already that where we're headed in the interview. So what do you bring to the organization besides your years of service? And you notice that I mentioned my education high on. I worked hard for that education. So set a welcoming and relaxed tone. You want to see this real person in front of you. You don't want to, this is not the time to be seeing how he handles stress. I've been mocked in an interview. If you don't notice, I have a problem with an eye. I had a lieutenant in an organization sitting on the board, and he was mocking my eye with that. There's no way I want to go to work with somebody who mocks people like that. This is a lieutenant. So when you try to do that stuff, you confuse the interviewee. I had made up on my mind. I ended the interview. I said, I don't want to work for your organization. So it discourages communications. Consider how this relates to your organization public relations. So your hiring practices do get out there. I left there with a concept of that whole department based on that one interviewer. And I know better than that, but because he was a lieutenant in that organization, that set the tone for me. So how you arrange the furniture, keep in mind of that too. It does set a tone. So agree on the roles during the interview. Each interview could be assessing a desired quality. And what will be the next stage in the hiring process? What additional assessments? And there you can evaluate how the person handles stress. But you want that person to be forthright and outcoming and not defensive and quiet during an interview. So the format is avoid the police scenarios. The rookies don't really know what police there is. So ask open-ended questions. Tell me about a time when, tell me a challenging situation and how you handled it. Those sort of questions. Tell us about your ethical standards. And just listen. Tell me what you've done for the community. Police work for the community. You want somebody that's going to care about the community. What do you bring to our organization? What do you expect from our organization? Those are good questions. How do you handle stress? How do you have fun? How do you relax? If it's slugging down a few beers with the friends, then I'm going to worry about that. And how competitive are you? How do you feel? Do you feel you always have to win? And also, how do your family and friends feel about your decision to join this organization? Because they're going to go home to these family and friends. Okay, so the mentor program. The mentor program can take several constructs. You know, the rookies, obviously, they're going to need a lot of mentorship. You get an employee goes on probation, he should have a mentor, or she should have a mentor. So they'll discipline employees if there's reason for a negative referral. There should be some sort of remedial training and a mentor to help them through that. There should be mentors for all employees. So mentors become an agent for change, and improvement is assumed with a mentor. And a mentor is a validate and assure individuals and the organizations. And they also provide objective feedback to the leadership and overseeing officials and the public. The mentor should not be subordinate to the organization. So, mentor program, there's of course the formal one, the field training officer for the rookies. There's the chain of command, there's the performance evaluations and the feedback. And it identifies ongoing education and training needs. The informal one, that's outside the chain of command but understands the police work. Someone who can be trusted and be non-judgmental, to be able to advise the mentee when they're wrong or when they're right. Refer the mentee for assistance. Encourage the mentee to reflect on their own. And then give feedback to the leadership without, as long as, if you've uncovered something that's illegal, then you need to report that. And advocate for the organizational improvement. Mentor programs, I think, are very important, and they're not used at all. So, review and align policies and practices. In my summary here, that's critical. That should be routine, always done. Do routine assessments, individual, the unit as a whole, and the organization as a whole. Review the personnel files. Use minimal discipline. Use it sparingly. Always keep in mind it's for remediation, training, education, counseling, professional and emotional. Continually seek high standards. Identify organizational strengths. Develop an organizational development plan. Communications have, of course, the formal communications, but also the informal communications. They're usually more open, more structured, and it allows you to identify rumors and avoid them. And mentors should be in your communication structure. And genuine transparency. We hear that word transparency a lot, but genuine transparency shows this confidentiality sometimes, but there's people can be trusted with confidentiality. So I'd like to leave with the thought that a quote that's given to Henry Ford, but I've heard it given to others too, including Albert Einstein. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So take a look at what you're doing. And I like to say, a very popular one, you can't put a square peg in a round hole, but I'll qualify that unless you get a bigger hammer. And that's what we do. We get the bigger hammer, we make the square peg get in that hole, but we not only damage the peg, we damage the hole too. So you hurt your organization when you try to make something fit that doesn't fit. So thank you for listening, and I hope this helps.